say this all the time about it's my extreme pleasure to introduce the next speaker. But you know, I'm not lying. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce the next speaker because I think Bob Ryan is one of the reasons many of you probably came here today to hear someone talk about sports in the way that he has covered it for so many years, and he is so visible in his activities both in print and in broadcast journalism. He knows the full spectrum of sports. I had the pleasure of having dinner with him last night, and he knows more minutia about sports than any person I have ever met. But I don't think he's going to talk about minutia today. I think he's going to talk about the world of sports and sports journalism as he sees it. And I'm not going to give you a big background about him because it's in the program. You could read a little bit about where he's been and what he's done. I can only tell you he did not graduate from St. Bonaventure University, and we won't hold that against him for today anyway. So Bob, the floor is yours.
Grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, and when I was 6 years old, my father became the assistant athletic director at Villanova. And that meant that for the mic is not on?
Yeah. Is that? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is it okay in the back? Yeah. For the next 2 years while he was there, we basically spent every weekend winter going to a college basketball doubleheader at either the Penn Palestra, where Villanova was a tenant, if you will, of Penn, or the Philadelphia Convention Hall, where St. Joe's LaSalle and Temple played. And of course, that was long before anyone ever conceived of anything like the Big East. And it was all Eastern independent schools. And the typical opponents, of course, would include the likes of Canisius, Niagara, and of course, St. Bonaventure. And the converse, of course, is that you got to play road games out there. And there was a great mythology that grew up. Living in the East, whether you believe it or not, living here, living on way on the coast, about the crazy, exotic, wild trips that you'd have to take to Western New York and play Canisius and Buffalo, and play Niagara and Niagara. But most of all, the dreaded trip to Olean, where you couldn't win at St. Bonaventure. And as a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, and then, well, forget that, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, this is all still going on, this mythology. The image of this place, Olean, St. Bonaventure, and it became a kind of a thing where, does it really exist? And is it a place that like you'll never visit, like, I don't know, Liechtenstein? You know? Well, yesterday I thought it was in Liechtenstein, and I've been treated extremely graciously, and I've been so impressed, not that I'm surprised, but so impressed by the strong feeling of so many people that I've been listening to today. My friends Adrian Wojnarowski and Mike Vaccaro this morning discoursing to an audience on the Dresser Auditorium, and everybody else that I've met. The strong finalists they feel for this institution, so everybody should feel very proud that something great, wonderful, and special has been going on here, and it's so nice to be a small part of it. A brief word about how I got into what I'm doing and how, you know, the Reader's Digest version of how I started out doing this and wound up here now, 43 years later, in front of you. Sports writing is a two-part work, and the two parts are equally important. As a matter of fact, the writing part is actually more important. But when you're a child, that's not the case. It's the sports part. And having been born into a sports-oriented family, my father was always involved in some kind of sports, whether it was promotion or business and management of a team, or in this case, the Villanova, the SSNAD. I always had we were going to sports events the time I can ever remember. So sports was kind of ingrained in the DNA, and I had an aptitude for it. It took. And I was that kind of obnoxious, everybody remembers this kid. And I was that obnoxious 8-year-old that knew the infield flagger. So it wasn't always that most popular guy with my friends when I had to point out all the niceties of the game to them. But sports were always ingrained. But the second part was something that not everybody has in equal measure with the first part. So the second part was the writing part and the love of the printed word. For some reason, I cannot explain to you. I've never been able to pinpoint it. I don't think anybody can. But for some reason, I was innately fascinated by the printed word and by the good reporting of games. So that, say for example, my father would take me to a Friday night game at the great, and it was the state power in those days, Trenton Catholic High School, and they would dispatch Red Bank Catholic or St. Peter's, New Brunswick, or whomever, and I would go home, and then the next morning, could not wait to grab the morning paper, the Trentonian, the tabloid, and read about the game. And in my mind, that game had no validation until I read about it. It was as if it never happened. I had to see it in print and to see what the writer had said about it. And another town, Trenton was a town of, it's a metropolitan area of probably about 250,000. It's smaller now. But every city of that size, there's a writer that is a local writer that is the guy. And you grow up wanting to, knowing that that's the guy. And if he's covering the game, it's important. In our case, the guy's name was Joe Logue, L-O-G-U-E. And I remember, Joe Logue was a guy I would think I want to be somebody. Joe Logue. And the fact that my family knew him a little bit was a little bonus. And finally, when I was 17 and playing prep school basketball, Joe Logue came to cover one of our games, and it was as if the Pope had dropped in for me. And I must say I had a good game that day. It was a great game. It was good. But that feeling of it's got to be validated in print is something that's always been important to me. So I had this aptitude, and I can't explain it, it's just part of who I am. So it was kind of natural that I would drift into sports writing. And was fortunate enough to go to a prep school, Lawrenceville School in New Jersey, that had a weekly newspaper, as opposed to the standard high school situation you often do with, I'm sure, which is certainly how many times a year, 4 or 6 if you're lucky. And really was a very important part of the school life. And I became a sports editor in that paper, and then went on to Boston College, alma mater of Coach Schmidt as well, and did not major in journalism. It was nothing willful. It just didn't go to a school that had a journalism major, but I wanted to be part of that world. I majored in history, did all kinds of reading and writing, and that's all I wanted to do, was to print something with having work for the school paper, radio station, etc. And the key for me was being a part of the sports information office. That got me the contacts to get an interview for Boston Globe, internship when I was a senior, and I was accepted into that program. And on the first day of work, I graduated on June 3rd. On June 10th, I walked into the Globe office and met one of the other 2 fellow interns, a guy you may have heard of. His name was Peter Gammons. So we started together June 10th, 1968 at the Globe, and we've been friends ever since. So that's the very short version of how I've only worked at one paper for my entire career, which is something that is very rare, very odd. I think Adrian and Mike and Jerry Sullivan would concur. Go ahead, name somebody else been in the business 43 years you know that's only worked at one paper. I think you're going to come up short on that one. It's like my wife is an only child, as am I. How many people in your acquaintance married only children, married only children? Very rare. So there's something, some weird stuff going on up there in the cosmos about the way I'm involved in this. But that's how I started. When I was, after this and that, before the intern year, had a little service work, Army work, going to the Army, active duty, it was Vietnam, I got into the reserves. And came back in the late winter of '69 and was an office boy for the next 6 or 7 months while they told me I would get the next opening on the staff. And I was sitting around on a Thursday, I'll never forget it, October of '69, and the boss was over, says, you probably thought we forgot about you, but we didn't. You're going to be on the staff, this, that, the other thing has happened, we have an opening. And by the way, you're covering the Celtics tomorrow night, the opening. 23 years old. No chance to go to an exhibition game, no chance to meet anybody, and not met the coach, any players. I'd never covered NBA, I never really had any experience in the NBA whatsoever. I was a college basketball player, but I was not an NBA savant at all, and was always a college guy first. And when you live in Boston, at that point for 5 years, you're obviously plugged into the Celtics, which doesn't mean you have to root for them, because I was from New Jersey, and I did not root for them. We root for the 76ers, but I'm going to cover opening night. Well, that was the start of a very interesting adventure that continues to this day. From a writing standpoint, one of the things that was evident right away was that nobody was going to teach you anything. In other words, they just threw me in there. Now, I don't know what's like where any of my friends have been, but they just said, here, go to the game, cover the game. And I had no experience with professional athletes, no experience with true interviewing skills, nothing. But I could write, I thought I could write about basketball, but that's only a minor part of the whole process. And had to teach it how to try through trial and error, learn it myself. And the very first night, blew the first deadline ever because I didn't gauge my time in the locker room. I didn't have any idea how long it was going to take. I tried to get too much. I didn't give myself enough time to write to make the deadline. This is my first deadline, the first edition deadline, and they weren't pleased back in the office, but you know, I guess they said, hey, you stupid kid, what do you expected? Tried not to do that too often in assuming 43 years, and I don't think I have. But it's just part of the thing that nobody said to you. Now be careful, you don't want to spend too much time there. You know, you can't, you have to sooner or later sit down to write. You can't try to do everything that you think you want to do. You've got to have to pick and choose. Nobody tells you these things. You have to figure them out for yourself. My great good fortune at the Boston Globe in the year 1969 was to have, we had a morning and an evening paper and separate staffs, and the two editors in charge were of a like mind that the writers had a right to write without too much interference from the editors. Within reason, of course, but ultimately they believed that it was a writer's paper, not an editor's paper. That was very unusual, very atypical, not exactly the norm, and even to this day, not the norm in some places. And what they did that I'm eternally grateful for is, I will say that they actively encouraged me to have a strong or distinct point of view, but they did not discourage me from adopting a point of view. And that's the word and the phrase I want to focus on briefly with regard to the stated topic that you saw, which is about opinion versus fact in this business. I am of the opinion that, and the word objectivity, which I hate, which I happen to think is irrelevant. I don't think there's any such thing as true objectivity in this business. Everything you do is ultimately subjective. Every decision you make as to what to write, what part of the sequence of events, you can't write about everything you saw in a game. I'm just talking about writing games for a minute. There's so many different aspects of sports writing, and I'll try to mention a couple of distinctions and as they apply to my two good friends here who are masters of what they do. But there are different kinds of things and job requirements that you have at different times in your career. And at that point, my job was covering the team, writing games, and covering the team. And I was allowed to express myself with opinion based on the goings-on in the game. In other words, I was allowed almost in the beginning to say good, bad, stupid, clever on a play, praise a player for something, knock a player for something. And here's one that, you know, hey, the other team has players too, you know, and some of them are pretty good. Why not mention them and what they do? Because it amazes me to this day how often that little detail is overlooked when people are covering games. So this paper enabled me to spread the wings, if you will. And one thing led to another. I was plugged into a situation, a rising tide, a team that in my first year, it was after Bill Russell had just retired, and Sam Jones, they had won their 11th championship in 13 years, and the first year basically fell apart, which was predictable. And the next year got Dave Cowens as a draft choice and turned the situation around immediately, and I began a rise that led on the fourth year to winning 68 games, and in the fifth year to winning a championship. Excuse me, that's why I got those. I rode that tide, and the paper gave me exposure and enabled me to institute a notes column, which was new, in the off season, not forget about the regular season, which we would continue to this day. And one of the points I'm going to make here is, A, they now have this point of view, and B, that they completely trusted me. If I said it, it was okay. That was 23, 4, 5 we're talking about here. But they obviously felt that I had demonstrated some sound judgment, I think so, in this matter, and enabled me to do stuff that other people didn't have the privilege of doing. I used to listen incessantly to the moaning and groaning of my colleagues on the road about, oh, they edited my copy, they changed this, they changed that, they won't let me do this. God, the New York Times, who now today own us, and thank God they didn't own us then, you know, that was still the era when you had to refer to the University of UCLA as the University of California, Los Angeles on the first reference every time. And then Illinois, and then after that, because you go UCLA, but you had to put the periods in. Seriously, true. That's the kind of stodgy nature the Times, you know, presented, with which they presented sports in the early 70s. It's totally radical change now, but that's the way they were then. And there were many other boring papers. And you ask yourself, after a while, I said to myself, thank God I'm sitting with these people, because my standpoint, my theory was this: if you're not going to allow your writer to express a point of view, then why send him or her? And they were starting to get the women kicking in by the late 70s, but why send him? And no offense to anybody late, no offense to the wire service, but or else just send the AP guy. Why waste time sending your own guy? And why are you going to get, if you're all going to get is you know, the who, what, where, when, and why presented in an orderly fashion, and not something written that has a whole different flavor to it. And that was taking place in other places. Now, as far as the fact and opinion thing, what do I mean by saying? Well, think about it. If you're covering a game, no matter what sport it is, you can't put everything happening in the game. It's not a play-by-play story you're writing. You're picking and choosing what you think are the salient points that had to do with the winning and losing of the game. I mean, that's basically what you're trying to do. And it's a difficult call, depending on the game, and there are different kinds of games, and all the sports have their different kinds of games. And you've got a space situation, whatever it is, and so judgments have to be made about what to put in. Well, that's subjective. That's not objective. So right away you're picking what you think are the obvious things. Sometimes they're not so obvious to other people. So that's what I mean. And once again, I'm strictly reducing this to this genre of the game story writing, which is what I grew up with, which I still have a strong feeling and fondness for. Game stories on deadline is still the most exhilarating thing and was some of the proudest things that I think I've ever done. And yet today, the game story is being phased out because everybody, they say that the next morning, everybody knows what happened in the game. Everybody saw the 11 o'clock Sports Center. Everybody now, they saw it on the BlackBerry. And I like to think, well, gee, maybe somebody might like to read a nice, coherent presentation of what the game is all about from a point of view of somebody that you come to trust. That's a little bit idealistic, I guess, but I'm still clinging to that. But that's what I mean about objectivity. Now, when you translate it into other areas of sport, we're talking about Adrian's field, one of his many fields, one where he excels is investigative reporting. Well, objectivity has a different tinge, but ultimately you're picking and choosing on things that you need to, you feel are the most important parts. And so what I think is, what it comes down to is not objectivity, but honesty, fairness, and sound judgment. And it takes a while, and establishment of trust with both the people you're covering and the audience. And the audience, after a while, makes a decision as to whether they trust you, and I'm in one place for 43 years, I like to think a lot of them do. But that's what I think about that. And I just think that it's a myth about this objectivity thing. Fairness is what you're talking about. You can't always be right. You may be totally wrong, and then that's fine. When you get the column writing, and you're talking about fairness, you're talking about opinions, and you throw stuff out. I think Mike would agree to this, or David, that the easiest columns to write are the "Oops, I'm sorry, I was wrong about that one. Boy, what idiot wrote that one? Well, it couldn't have been me, you know." Well, that's a no-brainer. But we all do them every once in a while. A, because they're easy. B, because they're valid. You're going to be wrong. Nobody's perfect. You're going to be wrong. You're going to make judgments that are going to prove it in time to be wrong. I like the Celtics trade with Oklahoma City when they made it. I may have to write one of those oops columns before this playoffs are over. I understand that, and I'm prepared. I'm already working out some of the one-liners. Which is what we do. You know, this is what we do. And that's part of the fun. The idea that I'm working out some one-liners, the idea, we like to play with words. And this is getting more and more important as this world evolves in our business, and it's changing with the onset and the overtaking of the internet and the preponderance of blogging and the tweeting and all the social media things that are changing the dynamics of what we do and our place in that world. And for somebody like me who, unlike Mike, unlike Adrian, yet to tweet, even though my boss has made not so subtle hints that he thinks I should, I haven't started yet. I don't see how it's going to benefit me, but maybe after I do it for a week, I'll find out, I wasted some time and I should have done it. But point being, it's a whole new world with all dynamics out there. But is there not still a place for somebody who could, you like to, cleverly turn a phrase to put a little smile on your face, or have you realize there's another way of phrasing something that you've read 10 times over, and this is another way of putting it that give you a little rise for a minute. In other words, that's all the art of writing. I like to think that's what I have to offer, because at this point, it's very, very difficult to compete informationally with people who have nothing else to do, it seems to me sometimes, but follow one sport exclusively, micromanage it to such an extent that it's beyond comprehension. Baseball is the first one to hit that with the single metrics people, and they know so much more about the details of their inner workings and the numbers in the game, and can have their valid opinions on people based strictly on numbers, as opposed to the old-fashioned way of looking at people, putting numbers in context and looking at them with your eyes. But these people exist. Now, then they took over football, taking over football, but certainly deep into basketball, which I still think is unquantifiable. I don't care what John Bonaventure says. I don't care. I don't want to hear about power index, and I don't want to hear about this. I'm sorry, but maybe I'm resisting too heavily. But, and then also hockey. I don't know what you do with hockey. I don't plus minus. Let it go with that. Right? I don't know what. And I don't know. And by the way, are there any hockeyologists, any puck heads here? Puckheads here that know that there are Are there? Does this exist in hockey? Are there deep numbers beyond the numbers? Are there OPSs for hockey?
Not really.
No, see, it's hard. And hockey's that's why it's the hardest game to write, and I admire the people who write it more than any writers in the world. I work with two of them. I work with two guys, Kevin Paul Dupont, who was in the Hockey Hall of Fame writers' wing, and Pluto Shinazawa, who was the best kept secret in Boston, writing by far, who can write this game, and I watch it, and I sit there and go, I'm gonna, and they're writing 4 paragraphs on a defenseman who should have covered up for the other guy, and I didn't even know who was in the lineup at the time. Because you can't keep track of who's on the game in hockey, because they're moving in and out every 30 seconds. How can you keep track of who's on? They can do this. And how do you broadcast hockey? How do they do this? It's worse than broadcast. It's like, it's like broadcasting hockey, especially when they put them up where they put them up now, in the heavens. It's like broadcasting the Kentucky Derby, the Belmont, and the Preakness all at once. I don't know how they do this. I never know who's on the ice at any given time until after the goal. I'm serious. I admire that. And that's why I'm scared to death, because the nightmare time is coming up for me. Thursday night, I got to cover the Bruins and Canadians, game 1. And hockey on deadline is cold sweat time for me, I can tell you that. That's not going to be a happy night. Think of me about 11 o'clock on Thursday night. Just think of me, all right? I'm going to be a much less happier person than I am right now. I'll be very happy with it. So anyway, we're talking about how there exist all these people now that they really do know a lot more about the games, any of the games than you do. Now, do they like it more than me? Could they write about it as well as I do? Or Mike does? Or? No, more than likely not. But boy, can they crunch those numbers. Now, when you run up against a double threat, a double play combination, such as the great Bill James himself, who attracted me initially because, in addition to the numbers, he wrote so beautifully. Joe Sheehan, who's I read every day when it's out there, who puts these things in and can write on top of the numbers, and many others. Joe Poznansky, everybody's favorite right now, and he should be. He's a wonderful guy, and he does a fantastic job. These people are tremendous. But as a columnist, I got to worry about basketball, football, baseball, hockey, golf, tennis, the college world, which is a whole other world unto itself. Ask Adrian about that. And, a whole other world unto itself. And yet you're trying to be, you can no longer really, how much can you bluff it and pretend to people that you're omniscient about all these different things? You can't be. But still, sometimes you're mandated to go write about some things, and all you hope is you don't make a fool out of yourself. And it's a little scary. So that's the way the world's evolving, all that, and not to mention all the bloggers and all the comments, and it's a very suffocating world for an old traditional columnist such as myself, who has a certain point of view about a lot of different things. So that part has made it a real challenge to think about how to, and I don't want to use the phrase reinvent yourself, but adapt yourself. That's probably better. Adapt yourself. And I don't know if I've decided on a course of action that is much different than what I've ever done. And just I have to hope that makes enough people happy until I quit. It's, you know, won't be too far down the road. So, but that part of it has been very interesting. But back to the coverage factor. I listened to Adrian and Mike talk today about such things as developing sources and how you, and Adrian talked about that, and how you manage them, keep them, and develop them, and talking about relationships that you need to develop with athletes and coaches and so forth. And I can just tell you this, I pity a young writer starting out today, trying to get this accomplished compared to the way it was when I started, when the accessibility was so different, so open, so easy. Walk into the, here's one, you ready for this, Adrian? I used to walk into NBA locker rooms and nobody had a headset on. How's that? Amazing. And they'd be there 2 hours before the game, and they would kick you out at about 15 minutes before the game. You know.
And they were smoking too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, they were smoking. Oh yeah, at halftime. Oh yeah, they were smoking. Oh yeah, they were smoking. Sure. I mean, no kidding. I mean, just no. I don't mean not. That was after the game. It doesn't matter. It was totally routine. It was totally routine. But the point is, the access was there. We traveled. We literally traveled with them. They had a quick story themselves about how the world has changed, covering the team. Early days of the team, when I was covering the early 70s now, they'd leave on a road trip, and there was an airport hotel, the Hilton, and airport overnight parking in those days was $5. And so rather than spend the $5, they had to deal with the Hilton where they could park the car at the Hilton and then take the vans over and save the $5. Okay, it mattered those $5 to those players in those days. Imagine that. That's the world they checked in themselves. Didn't have a trainer, a traveling secretary handing out the tickets. Of course, today it doesn't happen either because they all charter and they fly from an auxiliary airport. Celtics fly out of Bedford. The Pistons fly out of Oakland, Michigan. I'm sure all of them try to avoid the major airports as much as possible. That's the way the world is now, but it wasn't that way then. And you know, if you got stuck, if the plane got delayed, you're sitting there in the lounge with them, hey, let's go to the bar. I'll never forget a night I was in Chicago with the Celtics, and we were going coast to coast, and they were stopping, we were changing planes in Chicago, and they didn't have a nonstop available for us. And we ran into the Suns, who were coming the other way, and they were going west to east, changing planes in Chicago, and they had an hour to kill. And all the players on both teams, and the writers, and the trainers, we all went into the bar together. And that's the way the NBA was. It was one big fraternity, honest to God. Referees included, by the way. And that's the way. That's the ambience of the league that I was for. That formed my impression and viewpoint of the social aspect of the NBA. Then it was the playing aspect of it, which included being able to go to practice, the full practice anytime you wanted, stay as long as you wanted, come as early as you wanted. I used to go in an hour before the game, go into the locker room, sit down, just chit chat with the players. No notebook. This is how you got to know them. I knew the wives' names, the kids' names, and vice versa. They met my wife at the airport when we picked it up, and it's just, I cannot stress to you how different it was. Well, that's how you build relationships. But now, charter flights, how you build it? You don't stay in the same hotel. Well, basically because we want to be in Marriott. But that, I will admit, has changed the game a little bit too. But the fact is that, and they want to be now in Texas Power Island. They're all in Ritz's and Four Seasons. That's the level that they deal in. And we deal with Marriott level. So that's the way it is. But we used to literally travel with them. I used to carpool to the games with Rick Roby and another writer from my house. It doesn't happen. Did you ever do that? No, never do that. How about you? Mike, you ever do that? No.
If I did it, I'd be arrested.
But see, nobody thought anything odd about that. And so now, in the middle of this, you have to earn their trust. They're not going to tell you stuff if they see the wrong stuff show up in the paper. Now there's right stuff and wrong stuff. And you learn the difference. And you learn how to sit on for example, you could sit on something you heard, let it, cool down for a while, maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, I can put it in my notes column and attribute it, an Eastern Conference player, whatever. And get it in there. And it wasn't hot, it was kind of simmering down, and it was fun, it was a good item. And they learned over time they could trust you to have the proper judgment. Don't mention all the social films that we saw that that would be deadspin material for sure today that we saw that we just that was part of the deal. It's always a different world, and it was a fun world, and I would love to. I'd relive any or all parts of it in that regard. And I just seriously feel sadness for the younger writers who don't know how much fun that was. And the coaches, I mean, you know, all the coaches now, the game's over on the road, they're going back to the room and watch the tape. When Butch von Radekoff was done after the Pistons got playing in Detroit, he was going to the Lindell AC. And you were going with him, and you were closing it up. That's just the way it was. And so how do you compare the relationships that came out of all that to what's even remotely available today? You can't. So, so one reason, even in the college world, it's different, much less standoffish. Coaches weren't making $1 million or $2 million. We're making a whole lot more than you were, and it was just totally different. And of course, don't think money has changed everything, no question about it, and that's part of the deal. So it was so much easier then to develop the sources, develop the friendship, develop the trust that you needed. And if you made a mistake, they'll let you know, but you get a mulligan from it, maybe once, like one anyway. It was just so different and totally enjoyable. I wouldn't regret. I mean, honestly, standing here sounding nostalgic now. I've said often that if you can turn me back to January 1st, 1980 to January 31st, 1989, professionally, do it all over again, every bit of it, every one of those playoff series, I do every second. I do it all over. I might even turn it back to 1970. Give me 20 years. Those 20 years. But it all changed with charter flights and the Chicago Bulls. Worst thing ever happened to our business was the Chicago Bulls. I say that because they are the ones who built the first fortress training center that was at a separate entrance, so you didn't even know when people, if people were there, let alone when they got there. And you never saw practice. You got into the very end, very stilted circumstance. They put up the biggest wall. They put up the wall that everyone else has been trying to replace and emulate ever since. That changed all the tenor of the whole relationship between the media and teams in the NBA. And it was all definitely, I can tell you, having been there for it, was the Chicago Bulls. So from our standpoint, they're the worst thing that ever happened. For the fans and Michael Jordan, maybe the best. We'll argue that. But for us, it was the beginning and the end. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Where we sit, our access, our respect, it's just totally, and I admire anybody who can get the job done. Adrian gets the job done. Doing that, it's very difficult. You got to work twice as hard as we ever did, and you don't get to drink as much. It's a different job. Just briefly, I was fascinated listening to my friends this morning because it reminded me of some of the things that we've spoken about are applicable to some facets of our business, but not others. There's so many different kinds of sports writing. There's game stories, there's columns, there's features. There's so many different kinds of columns that you write. And one of the things that is omnipresent in the business that will never change for those of us in print is deadlines. And it's the crux of the business. You have to get the story in. As I told you, my very first night, I didn't make the deadline. And it's a cardinal sin. You can't do that. And you don't do it. And I make them all now. And every good writer makes them. You have to make them. That's it. So you have to guard your time. You have to budget. You have to understand how much time do I have to go in the locker room? How long can I wait? So when you're talking about, well, I can wait out, I can wait out player X after a game. I can't wait out player X after a game if I'm covering the Final Four column and it's 1 hour after the game. The deadline is when the game ends at 12:30, they need it by 1:30, and so on and so forth. That's it. No deviation, no slack. That's it. And sometimes you're lucky if they give you the hour. Sometimes 45. But that's basically what it is. Well, naturally, how to take it after the championship game. By the time they get done all the celebrating, right? They get done all the ceremony, all the confetti, all the ceremony, all the stupid interviews from Jim Nantz, and I like Jim Nantz, but all those dumb interviews that serve no purpose whatsoever and waste everybody's time. Before they finally get to the press conference, it's 30 minutes. What is 30 of my 1, of my 60? I can't be waiting for anybody, so I have to start writing. And I have to plug in poach a quote, steal a quote here and there from when they finally get talking off the press conference and plug it in to augment something. And you don't have this luxury. That's deadline. That's part of the deal. And still, it's a very challenging part of the deal. But in doing this, it's not going to be your best work. And that's the other thing you have to learn. But one lesson I learned with all you guys, men and women who want to go into this business, in any phase of it in terms of writing, whether you're going to write for an internet, or you're going to write for a paper, but the fact of the matter is, you can't hit a home run every day. You cannot hit a grand slam, two pitch home run every day. Once in a while you might, and you feel so good about yourself, and that's great. The fact of the matter is that you have a deadline, and some days the juices are flowing better than others, and you can't hit a home run every day. So I've adopted a standard for myself that enables me to feel that I did the job, and I'll come back tomorrow and try again. I call it a stand-up double. If I can hit a stand-up double, that's what I want to do at a minimum standard every single day. 365 stand-up double. Now I'd like to hit a lot of home runs. I can clear the bases a lot. And just as long as I don't pop up with the bases loaded too often, it's okay. But stand-up double. And I always picture Tony Perez. One hop up against the wall in left center. Any Reds fans here? Any? Yeah? Tony Perez. One hop up against the wall. Stand-up double. And you can't beat yourself up. You can't. It's a natural tendency. You want to do well. And you want to do your best work. You know I say it? I say, hey, you'll have to reconvene the Pulitzer Committee some other day. Not today. And then you come back, and hopefully the next day it's going to break your way, and that's that. So one other thing, I don't know if we're going to leave any more questions in that, I don't know. But, and I hope I've sparked some few things here. Quotes. One of the bane of my existence are quotes. The reverence that editors have for quotes is ridiculous, okay? Utterly ridiculous. And editors who demand quotes and the thought process that they have injected into the minds of younger writers, that they've got to have quotes to justify what they're writing, is just so frustrating to me. Most quotes are innocuous, number one, particularly uttered by adolescents or 21-year-olds, right? Most of them are innocuous. Most managers' post-game or coaches' post-game quotes are very generic and geared not to tell us anything, geared not to upset anything, geared not to reveal any strategy, geared not to reveal etc., etc. But in the course of time and those things, and certainly in the course of feature interviews that you hear, some good quotes pop up only by accident. And some people I've discovered have an ear for quotes and some don't. As a matter of fact, most people in this business do not, in my judgment, have an ear for quotes based on how I see they do what they do with the quotes they get. And I'm going to urge you to learn how to do one thing, and that is identify when there's a quote that must be used, that has something interesting about it, and learn how to set it up. You write in, I call write into a quote. You don't just pop it in there. You may need 3 paragraphs to set up the quote. It's like setting up your punchline and a stand-up, setting up the punchline. But it's a vital skill that separates a lot of the good ones from the great ones, I think, quite frankly, is learning how to use your quote. Be parsimonious with your uses of them and use them well as best you can. Now, the only exception to all this stuff about, what I say is quote, when you're on one of these hideous deadline situations, you do welcome all the innocuous quotes you can get as hamburger helper to fill up the story so you can hit that send button on time. Now, then and only then do I welcome random, insipid, useless quotes. They're things of beauty at that moment. But in general terms, learn what's a good quote and learn how to use it and set it up and get something and get the most out of it. And that particularly is true if you're going to do the one thing which I hate in general terms, but which can work in the right circumstances, is it's used very judiciously. Ending a story on a quote makes me gag. I hate that. There has to be a damn good reason in my mind to end the story in a quote. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end isn't some stupid quote that means nothing because you got tired of writing or you don't know what you're doing. No. But if you got a really good quote that is a punchline kind of quote, you can end the story on a great quote, but you've got to set it up properly. So, I rambled around, but I really wasn't sure exactly what was totally expected of me. But now we just finish up with one thing. If I have a reputation in this business, and very kindly, Adrian was kind to me this morning in saying this, I think they think of me, I like to think they think of me, and this gentleman right here used the word that I'm very proud to be associated with, passionate. Passionate about what I'm doing. Been doing this now professionally for 43 years. I wrote my first column for myself when I was 11. Typed it up, little column in my hometown, and about and it was typically arrogant because not only did it include observations on the parochial school basketball league I played in, but it was also included something about the Celtics. So that was a precursor. I didn't know that was ever going to have any real meaning in my life. But I was 11 years old when I first wrote something that would be considered an attempt at sports writing per se. And been doing it now, so well, that would make it 54 years, wouldn't it? And passion. The reason I think I'm still feeling pretty good about what I do, most times, even despite all the moaning and voting and complaining I did about how the world's changed, I can survive because of who I am and the respect people give me and the deference because I've been around, blah, 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 and it enables me to function where maybe some other people couldn't. I'm so grateful for that, believe me, and it makes my life passable in this regard. But I discovered something a number of years ago that you might find when I tell you to be odd. What makes me somewhat unusual at this point is I still like games. I like games. I like the games. I can get interested in the outcome of a game. I get fascinated by players. I went to the Final Four this year and I found a player I loved, George Mason, Luke Hancock, forward. And it occurred to me that what I've been doing, without knowing in the last 2 or 3 years, is I've found out I've been writing about players like that in the first round or second round. And the basis comes down to I'm looking for players that I'd like to adopt. And I'd like to take this kid home. I love this kid. And I still get enthused about a new player or a special player or a player who has certain attributes that I think are in short supply, not to mention the outcome of games. A lot of guys in this business really don't like sports anymore. They really don't. They really don't like sports. They got somewhere around the way that there became a great disconnect. And they really don't like the sports. They don't care about the games. And they'd be happy if they never had to cover a game. And I'm not like that. And this is proof I can tell you, and this is horribly anal and really risky to even mention this anymore in public than I already have, but I can't go to a baseball game if I don't score. And I won't. And so I've got my scorebooks for every game I've covered since first game of spring training in 1977. And there's like 8 scorebooks. They include Major League, Minor League, college, those 3 aspects of things, which means there's a lot of very interesting things in there. Believe me, when you do that, you have a lot of interesting keepsakes. And that just, it keeps me fresh in a sense, to want to do that. I still love the games. I will always love the games. I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to meld my the only 2 identifiable skills that I possess, I think, are writing and love of sports. So I'm very happy to stand before you and tell you it's been a pleasure to have to do this all these years. And I want to thank Adrian and Mike for getting me here because I really didn't realize the significance and scope of the Dick Joyce Sports Symposium before, and I sure do now. I always knew I kind of liked those cuddly folks out there in Bonnie Land and Liechtenstein, and everybody's been so great. And I want to congratulate Jeremy Neeson for winning the Domino Award, and I want to pay one final tribute because this is, believe me, not remotely manufactured. Linda Murray, your husband, was in fact a legitimate idol of mine. I have a book that he got autographed by a friend of mine, a friend of mine went to school with up in St. Pedro, and went to a signing of a collection that Jim Murray did in 1965. And I have it. And my friend told him that I was the columnist at the school paper, and I was a rabble-rouser. So he inscribed it and said, "To Bob Ryan, keep out of hot water," with 2 exclamations by Jim Murray, one of my treasured keepsakes. I used to spend my off hours at the school library going to look at the Philadelphia Inquirer because they syndicated Jim Murray in the days, and that's how we did it in those days. And grew up worshiping Jim Murray and wanting to get into the same business with him and be in his presence on a number of occasions. Can't say that we knew each other, no, but I knew we had plenty of mutual friends. And then to meet you now and to hear what you've done for journalism and to propagate this business that we are. I think it's tremendous, and I'm really so thrilled to meet you. But Jim Murray was the reason as much as anything else over and above that aptitude for this business. So I'm really happy you guys, everybody got me here today, and thank you very much.